Before we begin, since this is a BBC-owned property, I feel the need to point out that the news arm of the BBC has a continuing issue with transphobic leanings in its news coverage. You can find in a pinned comment below various videos from both myself and other YouTubers covering this issue. And while I understand that the Doctor Who creative team is not responsible for this, I will continue to point this out for as long as it remains a consistent issue. Thank you.
Look, I'll just be honest. He did look pretty good on that horse. Flux continues, and we've arrived at what was, to my memory, the good episode of Flux. The way that I remembered this was that, yes, there's some of the overarching stuff that at first viewing may or may not end up paying off later, but that the main body of this, dealing with the Sontarans and all that, is not only decent, it's some of the better stuff Chibnall has done. I don't know how much I stand by that. I mean, grading on the scale of Chibnall's work as showrunner, it might still be some of the better stuff he's done, but it's worse than I remember. Well, sort of. The stuff that I remembered is basically what I remembered it being. It doesn't land quite as well. The stuff set in the war, the various characters, some of the moments with the Sontarans, they're all decent, but I think in a way it really benefited from lower expectations. The Halloween apocalypse really put me in a position of going, oh God, is this going to be all bad? And this felt like something like, oh, okay, this is actually pretty decent. And I feel like my memory gave it more benefit of the doubt, because while it's decent, that stuff is at least, it's also not particularly exceptional once the novelty wears off. The novelty of things like the Sontarans looking more like they did back in classic era Doctor Who, which I do like. The original appearance of the Sontarans in Time Warrior, Commander Lynx, who gets name dropped here, which I also loved. That's one of my favorite classic era stories. It might well be my favorite Third Doctor story. And so I'm a sucker for that. We have fun moments and lines from the Sontarans where they are still allowed to be funny, but they're not made completely stupid. So you can have lines like,
"Human scum! You will be stamped beneath the boot of Sontar at a future point to be determined."
That's fun. That's funny. That's a mockery of the warrior mentality. And again, that goes back to the roots of the Sontarans. The first thing Lynx did in the Time Warrior, getting out of his little egg-shaped spaceship, was plant a flag on a planet he knew nothing about, because that's just how they are. That was all good and fun and funny. I found Mary Seacole to be kind of interesting, largely because, speaking as an American, she's not someone who I knew a ton about, so I was more forgiving of the Wikipedia-style exposition used to explain her, because this was new information for me, so I was more forgiving of that. So the thing is that kind of stuff, that novelty, that pop of, oh, old Sontaran design, oh, Lynx reference, ooh, I don't know her. That's the stuff that doesn't last on a rewatch. And once that wears off, what's left with the Sontaran stuff is it's decent, it works, but it's not much to write home about. But the bigger problem, ultimately, is that the non-Sontaran stuff takes up a significantly bigger percentage of this than I remembered. I think that was my brain forcibly kind of shoving all of the non-Sontaran stuff to the side in, under a vague category of, I'll know what this means later. And to my memory, it was a lot less of the episode than it ended up proving to be upon rewatch. And given how I feel about the overarching story, Yeah, having more of it than I thought was in here. Not great. Not great at all, especially as we're starting to dip into some of the just real nonsense. And I don't just mean narrative nonsense. I mean, why would you even do that? So, like, we get introduced here to the concept of the Mori and these beings that are somehow responsible for containing time. Now, there's some things here, there's a phrase even that I'm like, I want to know what that looks like because that sounds fascinating. There's the phrase, time would run wild. Oh? But the show, this episode, at least into my memory, the season as a whole, we'll see, doesn't really dive into that idea. It felt like it could have almost been a second bite at the apple to the thing that Moffat completely dropped the ball on back in series 6. What was it? The Wedding of River Song, where like all of time was happening at once, was just a thing they say at the beginning. And the show does almost nothing with that concept. This again, like, and here they do even less. They just say time would run wild, and like this weird upside down pyramid repair droid or whatever the heck it is has this line like,
Time is evil, and it will seek its own.
and I'm like, what? And this, I'm not trying to jump ahead, but knowing where this is going, or at least my understanding of where it's going, and that like we're going to actually meet eventually an embodiment of time. I don't know why. I don't know why any of this. I don't know why trying to drop this sort of intrigue of time is evil. What is it? What? Like, it would have been more interesting if it was left as the abstract, but I know that's not going to be the case. They're actually going to personify it, which is so weird to me. But also, like, just the general trope of, oh, if not for these few beings, everything would come apart, which is just, it's a really lazy trope. It's a really lazy way to raise the stakes. To say that, like, reality itself or everything would fall apart or fall to ruin or tear itself apart if not for this one MacGuffin, these few people. Like, no, that's not. You've scaled it too big. You're saying all of time and space falls apart if these people aren't standing in these exact same places doing I don't know what. You don't really explain what it is they do. And they're, I mean, technically they're people, and because it allows them to like put Yaz in space of one of these things, but like narratively, they might as well be a fuse box. Why would you make them people? That just raises a bajillion questions that, again, to my memory, this thing doesn't answer. But I'll try and pay attention on the next one, because I remember the next one being an absolute disaster. But I'll try and pay as much attention as I can to that. But even coming back to the Sontarans, it's light. It has a good sense of fun. I do enjoy it, but it's, like I said, a lot of the best parts of it just kind of have that initial pop of recognition or nostalgia or novelty. You don't get that on a rewatch. You just don't. And we are starting to pile up the things that don't ever get properly explained. So I had completely forgotten that this is there, but when Yaz and Dan start to fade out and go to different times and places, there is an offhand explanation from the Doctor. And it has to do with the way in which the vortex energy that she had tried to fire at the flux is intermixing with the flux energy. And that's causing them to kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, become unstuck in time. That's fine. That's a perfectly serviceable technobabble explanation for why Yaz and Dan fade away, but also why the three of them survived getting hit by the flux. The time vortex energy didn't stop it, but it did create enough of a wibbly-wobbly effect that instead of being destroyed, they and the TARDIS were thrown through time and space. Cool. That works. That functions. How did Vinder end up in that friggin' temple of whatever with the Mori? How did he end up there? Because he got hit by the flux, to my memory, but there was no time vortex for him. Or heck, why are Swarm and Azure here? And what is Passenger that just shows up? Now, again, I remember Passenger is going to be kind of explained later. But again, the way it's introduced and it's just dropped and it's one more thing of, okay, but what the hell is that now? And Swarm and Azure, I'm really going to be curious. Because at this moment in time, at time of recording, I can't remember if Swarm and Azure are actually responsible for the flux or not. Because if they're not, why is all of this going on at once? What are they doing in this story if they're not responsible for that? Eating up time. And again, as I said last time, giving decent enough performances, all things considered. But they show up and they're talking through the standard villainous sort of monologue-y kind of stuff, showing off that, you can't hit me with your gun and whatnot. And it's all functional. It's fine. But I still don't know who these people are. I don't know what they want. Swarm obviously wants to hurt the Doctor. Okay. Why? And I guess we've just decided they just know things.
Commander Binder, shamed, disgraced, and rejected.
They know who Yaz is, and I guess by extension that is supposed to be meant to answer my question that they just know who Di is, the woman that Dan was going to go on the date with that they kidnapped last time, although I still don't understand, even if they knew who she was and knew that somehow Dan would end up connected to the Doctor, what do they need her for? I can't remember if that gets answered, why they targeted her or not. But again, just granting villains omniscience, where suddenly they just know a bunch of stuff they shouldn't know. Well, how do they know? Oh, that's how you know they're powerful. No, that's how you know the writing is just lazy. And I don't need an explanation for everything. Heck, there are times that I revel in a lack of explanations on certain things. But there are other times where no, this begs a lot of questions that you're just moving forward as if they don't exist. And that doesn't feel like a deliberate choice to keep certain things mysterious. That feels like a mistake. That feels like you didn't realize the questions that your own story was bringing up. You don't seem to be aware that you're raising questions at all. It's frustrating. Because as I said, to my memory, this is the good one. And it does have decent moments. I like the playing off of the pompousness of the British officer, which, yeah, that tracks. I don't have a problem taking a hit or two at that. But why are they remembered as having always been there? How did they supersede Russia? Why would they do that? And if they have done that, and they've got the weapons that they do, why haven't they already won? Again, these are the kind of things that if this was properly the entirety of the episode and it didn't have to share space with the flux stuff, there was time to answer these questions, but not when it's got to share space with all this other stuff. So what we end up with is a cut down Cliff's Notes, almost kind of version of a Sontaran story that could have been better if it had just been afforded the entire episode runtime to itself. But instead it has to share it with this other stuff, and it's lesser for it, even though it is very much the better material and the stronger stuff. Oh, and I'm sure some people are going to mention in the comments, why can't I talk? The comments, the whole thing with Dan and he's running away from the Sontarans, they can't seem to hit him from a few yards away. It's not good. I'm not going to defend it. I will say it doesn't bother me nearly as much as, say, the stuff last episode when the drones couldn't hit the Doctor and Yaz, who were just hanging there, because they literally were just hanging there. Dan was at least running. They should be able to hit him. He's not running that fast. He's not serpentining or anything. They should be able to hit him. I'm not going to disagree with that. But that strikes me much more as a bad directing choice, that you shouldn't have made that the angle. You should have cut it in a way to obfuscate how close they were to him. Because, yeah, it's really not bad in concept, but it's ruined by that angle. Also, like, I'm wondering at this point, what's the point of Azure? Is it just so Swarm, I don't know, has a visual complement? Like, again, her design, I think, is pretty nifty, and her performance is decent. I don't get why she's there. Like, her appearance raised a ton of questions for me in the last episode, and then on top of that, I just don't know what she brings that isn't just provided by the one guy who's eating up most of the runtime. It feels less like that Swarm and Azure are two characters with a dynamic, and it feels more like the same character was written twice.
If you want an example of what it is I'm trying to compare this to, you can look at the episode Can You Hear Me and the characters of Zelen and Rakea, who are very similar in a lot of ways, but also are distinct enough that they have a clear dynamic and it's not just the same character twice. If they both effectively do the same thing and have the same function, there's really no need for there to be two of them. It's redundant.
Again, I'm largely disappointed in this, but again, yeah. There's still enjoyment to be had here, and this is probably the one I'm going to enjoy the most still, unless like something really turns around for me in the later ones, which I have a hard time believing, but hey, stranger things have happened, or so I've heard. But yeah, War of the Sontarans. You know what? I'm just going to go to bed. I'm going to finish recording this, and I'm going to go to bed, because my brain has decided that it's done. And I'm going to take that as my cue to ask you, what did you think about this episode? Have you rewatched it lately? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Even if you cannot assist me with that, anything that you feel like doing. Checking out other things that I do in the description. Liking, sharing, subscribing. All that stuff's great. Don't worry too much about it, though, because what I really want you to remember is you are beautiful. You are valid. You are loved. You're at the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.
Massive thanks to my Patreon supporters, and in particular, I want to thank Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Ruth, Oliver B., Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Jen, Leotha Boyd, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernabilax the Poodle, Robin Powell, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Kasparov, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, David Hall, Shayla Gourlay, and Rosalind Bennett. Thanks for your support. You can get your name in the credits too if you feel like hearing me possibly struggle with it for several times before getting it right.